When the doctor told me I had only 5 days left to live, my son gripped my hand tightly and said, "Finally, just 5 more days. Everything and all your assets will belong to me." I was frozen when I heard what he said, but I pretended as if I hadn't heard a thing. After he left, I called my lawyer, because in that very moment, I understood I didn't have much time left. But it was still enough to rewrite the ending for everyone who thought they had already won. I truly appreciate you being here. Before we continue, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments so we can connect. Also, please note, this story may include fictional elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people or places is purely coincidental, and the message is intended to be meaningful. The first thing I remember is the beeping. Not like the gentle alarm clock from my penthouse apartment, this was different. Relentless, clinical, a constant reminder that I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was trapped in a box with walls the color of institutional grief and machines that seemed to have more life in them than I did. I forced my eyes open. The fluorescent lights above burned like 1,000 angry suns, and for a moment I couldn't remember how I'd gotten here. Then it came back in fragments, the weakness in my legs, the yellowing of my skin in the mirror, the way my best Armani suits no longer fit. I'd chalked it all up to age, to the stress of running a tech empire that had made me a very rich man at 64. Wrong. My hands felt like lead weights. I tried to lift my arm, and it took everything I had just to move it an inch. The IV line tugged at my inner elbow, and I felt the sting of it, a small thing, but it told me something serious was happening. Real serious. "Charles." A voice cut through the fog. Dr. Michael Thornton. I'd known him for years, a sharp man, good reputation, the kind of doctor who didn't waste words. His face now was different, though. Ashen, like he was delivering something he'd rather not. He pulled a chair close to my bed, and that's when I knew. Doctors don't sit when they have good news. "Your liver is in critical condition." He said, his voice careful and measured. "Advanced cirrhosis. I'm going to be direct with you, Charles. We've run every test. The damage is too extensive." He paused, and in that pause, a year of my life seemed to drain away. "You have roughly 5 days. Maybe a week, but I'd prepare for 5. 5 days. The words landed like a sledgehammer, and I waited for the panic to follow. For the fear. For something. But what came instead was something colder, a kind of clarity that only shows up when you realize the clock is actually ticking and you can hear it. "See, we'll keep you comfortable," Thornton continued. "We can manage the pain, keep you stable. But I won't lie to you, this is end stage." I nodded. I wasn't really hearing the rest of it anymore. My eyes had moved past the doctor, landing on the figure standing in the corner of the room, my son, Vincent. He was 35, impeccably dressed, in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than some people's cars. He worked in administration at one of my tech companies, a position I'd given him more out of obligation than because he'd earned it. He was handsome in that polished way that money teaches you to be, with dark eyes and a smile that had never quite reached those eyes, not even when he was a kid. He was smiling now. It wasn't a smile of concern. It wasn't the smile of a son who'd just learned his father was dying. It was something else entirely, something I couldn't quite name, but something my gut recognized immediately. My gut apparently was still working better than my liver. Our eyes locked for just a fraction of a second, and in that moment I saw something shift in his expression. A flicker. Like he'd forgotten himself. Like the mask had slipped, and I'd caught a glimpse of whatever was underneath. Then it was gone. The smile widened and he stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Dad, we'll get through this," he said, his voice soft, almost rehearsed. "The best doctors, the best care, whatever it takes." The words were right. The tone was right. Everything about it was exactly what a concerned son should sound like. And yet, I shook his hand or tried to. My grip was weak, pathetic. His was firm, confident. He held on a beat longer than necessary, and I wondered if he could feel my pulse racing, if he could sense that something in me had just fundamentally shifted. "Thank you, Vincent," I said, and I meant it, though not in the way he probably thought. After he left, after Thornton left, after the nurses came and adjusted my IV and checked my vitals with practiced efficiency, I lay there in the quiet hum of that ICU room, and I started remembering. I remembered the tea. Natalie had been bringing it for months. My wife, or rather my son's wife, though the distinction had started to blur in my mind lately. She'd appear with these little cups, smiling, that smile that didn't quite match the one in the photos from their wedding. "For your energy, honey," she'd say. "It's herbal. Very good for you." I'd drunk it. Day after day I'd drunk it, never thinking twice. Why would I? She was family. But now, lying in this bed with 5 days to live, or 5 days before something changed anyway, I began to wonder. I began to remember the timeline. When had the weakness started? 3 months ago, longer. When had Natalie started bringing the tea? My mind was sharp, clearer than it had been in years, actually. Sharp enough to know that Vincent's smile and Natalie's tea, and this liver that was apparently destroying itself from the inside out, didn't add up to coincidence. Sharp enough to know that I had maybe 5 days to figure out what the hell was happening to me. And sharp enough to know in my bones that I was running out of time. I had to do something, anything, before it was too late. The machines beeped on. The fluorescent lights hummed. And I lay there in the dark heart of the night alone, except for the nurses who checked on me every few hours, and I made myself a promise. Whatever was happening, I would find out. And I would make sure it mattered. The clock on the wall said 11:47 p.m. when I heard the soft click of the door closing. I'd been lying awake, not sleeping, couldn't sleep, wouldn't sleep. My mind had been a loop of questions, memories, fragments of conversations I'd filed away without thinking twice about them at the time. The IV drip had been changed twice since Vincent left that afternoon. The nurses had come and gone like ghosts, and through it all I'd been waiting. Not consciously. But I'd learned something in 64 years of building an empire. When something doesn't add up, the answer usually comes looking for you. Vincent stepped into the room like he owned it. And I suppose in his mind, he did. He was wearing a fresh shirt, now black expensive, and his face had lost that careful mask of concerned son. It was something else entirely. Something hungry. He locked the door behind him. That simple action told me everything. "I can't sleep either, Dad," he said, and there was something almost playful in his voice. He pulled the visitor's chair right next to my bed, close enough that I could see the flecks of color in his eyes. Close enough to smell his cologne, something sharp and artificial. I didn't answer. I was listening. I was watching. I was a man who suddenly understood that the rules of the game had changed, but I didn't yet know all the pieces on the board. Vincent smiled. It was the smile I'd seen flicker across his face that afternoon, the one that didn't reach his eyes. This time he let it stay there. Let it bloom. 5 days, he said softly. Isn't that something? Just 5 days, and the house, the company, all of it, everything you've built comes to me. He leaned back in the chair, utterly relaxed, utterly certain. "I have to say, I'm impressed by how quickly you're going. I honestly thought it would take longer." The room seemed to tilt. Or maybe I was the one tilting. "What are you talking about, Vincent?" He laughed. Actually laughed. It was a sound like breaking glass. "Come on, Dad. Don't insult my intelligence. I know you're smart. I've seen you negotiate billion-dollar deals. You've got that look right now, the one where you're connecting dots." He leaned forward slightly. "So let me connect the last one for you. The tea. 3 months. Every single day, Natalie's been bringing you that herbal blend. And every single day, you've been drinking it like a dutiful husband, like a trusting father. My mouth had gone dry. Not from fear, though the fear was there cold and creeping, but from something else, the strange, terrible clarity of having your worst suspicions confirmed by the person who orchestrated them. You, I started, but I didn't know how to finish. You what? Poisoned me, tried to kill me. The words seemed too small for what I was hearing. Me and Natalie. Vincent continued as though I'd complimented him on his cologne. She's smarter than people give her credit for, very creative in the kitchen, very attentive to your needs. He stood up now, pacing the small room, like he had nowhere else to be, like this wasn't a confession of attempted murder, but rather a victory lap. 3 months of that special tea. The doctors can't even tell where it came from, can they? They just see a liver that's failing a body that's betraying you. I wanted to move, wanted to lunge at him, to grab him, to do something. But my body was a prison, and Vincent was the warden, and he knew it. He absolutely knew it. You have maybe 5 days left, Dad. A week if you're lucky. And when you're gone, when the will is read, oh, the will that says everything goes to me, Natalie and I are going to disappear. Maybe Bora Bora. I've always wanted to see the water there. He stopped at the window, looking out at the Denver skyline like he was already admiring his new view. $75 million. That's a lot of water to look at. Oh, but people will know, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin, dangerous in a way I didn't recognize. The doctors will list it as advanced cirrhosis, which technically it will be, just accelerated. He turned back to me and his expression was almost sympathetic. Almost. You think you're going to prove anything? You think anyone's going to believe you if you start screaming about poison, a dying man, confused, paranoid? He shook his head. Well, even if you could prove it, and you can't. By the way, we were very careful, it wouldn't matter. You'll be dead. There was no doubt in his voice, no hesitation. No part of him that seemed to register that he was talking about killing his own father, like he was discussing the weather. He moved toward the door, unlocking it, with the same casualness he'd locked it. Enjoy your last few days, Dad. Natalie will probably visit tomorrow with some soup or something. She's very thoughtful that way. He paused in the doorway, one hand on the frame. Oh, and don't bother calling anyone. Who would you call? What would you say? That your son is a killer? That your wife is a murderer? He smiled again, that glass-breaking smile. Good luck with that. And then he was gone. I was alone in the ICU room. My heart pounding so hard I thought the machines might alarm. My hands were shaking. Every muscle in my body was screaming at me to move, to act, to do something, anything, but I was trapped. Trapped by a body that was failing, by a situation that seemed impossible, by the fact that Vincent was absolutely right about one thing. No one would believe me, except I didn't need them to believe me. Not yet. I didn't need proof yet either. Because something Vincent had said in all his arrogance and confidence had been a mistake. He'd told me everything, not because he was stupid, but because he thought I was helpless. He thought I was dying. He was wrong about one of those things. My eyes moved to the hospital phone on the nightstand. It was just within reach if I stretched, and as I lay there in the darkness, listening to my own heartbeat and the steady beep of the machines, I realized something with absolute clarity. I had 5 days, and I was going to make every single one of them count. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't have, even if I'd wanted to. The darkness of the room became my confessional, and my own mind became the priest. Hour after hour I lay there and let the memories come. Not in order, not in any logical sequence, but in fragments. Pieces of a puzzle I'd been too busy, too trusting, too blind to see clearly while it was happening. The tea, that's where they all started, those memories. Every morning for the past 3 months, sometimes twice a day, Natalie would appear with her smile and her ceramic cup. She was good at this. I could see that now with the clarity that comes too late. She never made it seem important, never made it seem like anything other than a simple gesture of care from a daughter-in-law who'd somehow, over the years, become almost family. An herbal blend, she'd say, setting it on the nightstand beside my bed in the study. It's excellent for energy. A friend recommended it. You've been working so hard lately, honey. And I'd drink it. God, I'd drunk it like it was water. Without question. Without doubt. The taste was slightly bitter, but not unpleasant, almost earthy. There was honey in it, I think. Or maybe that was just her sweetness masking whatever was actually in there. I'd complimented her on it more than once. Best tea I've had in years, Natalie. Where do you get the blend? She'd smile that smile and say something vague about a health store in Boulder, and I'd think how nice it was that she cared enough to track down special things for my health, my health. The bitterness of that thought was worse than anything she'd ever put in a cup. Vincent's visits came with a different rhythm. Not every day, but often enough. He'd show up at my office or at home always with questions that seemed casual, interested. How are you feeling, Dad? You look a little tired. Or everything okay? You seem a little off. His eyes would watch me carefully, while he asked, gauging my answers like he was taking inventory. I'd never noticed the calculation in those eyes until that night. But once I did, I couldn't stop seeing it. The symptoms came so gradually that I'd barely registered them as symptoms at all. A vague tiredness that I attributed to age to the long hours building my company. A slight nausea that I figured was stress or something I'd eaten. My hands and feet had started to feel numb, almost tingly, and I'd mentioned it to my doctor during a routine checkup. He'd suggested better shoes, more sleep, maybe some magnesium supplements. Very helpful. Very wrong. I'd been losing weight too. My suits had started to feel loose around the middle, and I remembered being almost pleased about that vanity, even at 64. Even as my body was slowly betraying me, I'd been thinking about how nice it was not to need alterations. The worst part wasn't the memories of the symptoms. It was the memories of Vincent and Natalie watching me experience them. The small comments, the careful concern, the almost imperceptible satisfaction when I'd mentioned feeling worse. Well, maybe you should see a doctor, Dad, Vincent had said 3 weeks ago. You don't look like yourself. Oh, he'd wanted me to see a doctor. He just probably didn't expect me to survive the conversation. 2 weeks ago, I'd done something on impulse, one of the few smart things I'd apparently managed in the last 3 months. I'd gone to a walk-in clinic, asked for a blood test without telling anyone. I'd listed vague symptoms and sat in an uncomfortable chair while a phlebotomist drew what felt like an entire pint of my blood. The doctor had seemed mildly concerned, but not alarmed. Just ordered some basic labs, nothing comprehensive. I'd paid cash, told them to send results to a P.O. box I'd opened years ago for business correspondence I didn't want traced through the house. Boulder Medical Labs. They had the fastest turnaround time in the state. I had no idea what I was looking for at the time. Just a feeling. Just that same gut instinct that had built my company and had apparently never completely abandoned me, no matter how much poison they'd poured down my throat. Now lying in the darkness of this ICU room with my son's confession still echoing in my ears and my wife's betrayal burning like acid in my stomach, I understood. That blood test was my insurance policy. That P.O. box held whatever truth was left to find. The results should have arrived by now. Maybe they had. Maybe they were sitting there waiting for me, proof of what I'd already been told, but needed to validate with something harder than a dying man's intuition. I had 5 days, and somewhere between here and that P.O. box in downtown Denver, there was evidence. There was science. There was something solid I could hold on to, something that couldn't be smiled away or explained as the paranoia of a man on his deathbed. All I had to do was figure out how to reach it. The night stretched on. The machines beeped their steady rhythm. And in my mind, I walked through 3 months of my life again and again, seeing it all differently now. Every moment of trust recategorized as stupidity. Every kind gesture re-examined for poison. But beneath the anger and the betrayal, something else was building. Something that felt almost like hope, because Vincent had made a mistake. In all his confidence, in all his certainty that I was helpless and dying and would take my secrets to the grave, he'd overlooked one thing. I'd already started looking for answers before he'd ever told me what the questions were. And tomorrow, when the nurses came for my vitals and the doctors made their rounds, I was going to find a way to make a phone call. I was going to find out what that blood test had revealed, and then, God help me, I was going to burn everything down. The morning light was cruel. It washed across my face at 6:47 a.m., and I hadn't slept a minute. My eyes felt like sandpaper, my body like it belonged to someone else. The IV had been changed again while I was lost in those memories, and the saline drip did nothing to ease the ache that had settled into my chest, somewhere between rage and resignation. Jennifer Cole was the first nurse of the day shift. I recognized her. She'd been kind to me in that perfunctory way. Hospital staff learned to be kind, efficient with her touch, but gentle with her words. She was maybe 30, with reddish hair pulled back in a practical bun, and the kind of face that suggested she'd seen too much suffering to be shocked by anything. She was holding an envelope when she came in to check my vitals. "You got mail," she said, holding it up. "From some lab in Boulder. I put it aside yesterday, but I figured you'd want it. Medical stuff, right?" She didn't wait for an answer, just set it on the rolling table beside my bed, and continued with her routine temperature pulse, the quick clinical assessment that had become my daily reality. My hand moved toward the envelope almost involuntarily. "You okay, Mr. Hayes?" Jennifer paused, studying my face. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Just didn't sleep well," I managed. She nodded sympathetically and left, pulling the door closed with a soft click. And then I was alone with the envelope. I stared at it for maybe 30 seconds. It was standard medical envelope, white unremarkable, with a return label that said Boulder Medical Labs in blue sans serif font, the kind of thing you'd expect to get from a routine checkup. Except I knew what was inside, or at least I knew what I hoped was inside. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The letter was printed on official letterhead, clinical and precise. I didn't read all of it. At first I couldn't. My eyes jumped around, catching fragments. Elevated levels. Palliative grade compound. Unusual concentration. Recommend immediate follow-up with prescribing physician. Then I forced myself to start from the beginning and read it all the way through. The compound they'd found was called levorphanol, a palliative care medication used primarily for pain management in terminal patients. It was a real drug, a legitimate one, the kind of thing that wouldn't immediately set off alarm bells, because it was FDA approved and widely used in hospitals and hospice settings. But the concentration in my blood was what made my chest tighten. The report stated that the levels were approximately 4 times higher than a standard therapeutic dose, and the pattern they'd noted, this specifically, suggested chronic exposure over an extended period. Not a single overdose, not an accidental ingestion, but a sustained, methodical introduction of the compound into my system over what the report conservatively estimated as several months of administration. Several months. The science was undeniable. The mechanism was explained in clinical language that somehow made it worse. Levorphanol in therapeutic doses was safe, but in sustained elevated doses over months, it accumulated in fatty tissues. It metabolized through the liver, and in the concentrations they detected combined with the duration of exposure, it would progressively compromise hepatic function, until, and here the language got particularly detached, complete organ failure, until your liver stopped working, until you died. The report concluded with a recommendation to contact poison control, to report this to authorities, to seek immediate investigation into how these levels had accumulated. I held the paper in my hands, and I felt something crystallize inside me. Not panic, I was past panic. Not fear that had given way to something colder and sharper. Clarity. They had done this deliberately, methodically. with scientific precision. Vincent and Natalie hadn't just randomly thrown poison at me and hoped for the best. They'd researched, planned, executed. They'd found a drug that would be hard to detect without a comprehensive blood panel. They'd administered it in a way that mimicked a natural decline, and they'd nearly gotten away with it. The letter trembled slightly in my grip. I needed to hide this, not because I was afraid of them finding it. Vincent already knew what was in here in principle, but because once I made a move, once I activated whatever plan was forming in my mind, this document would become either my salvation or my downfall. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into my shirt beneath the hospital gown. It crinkled softly against my ribs. 5 days. That's what they'd given me. 5 days, and I'd need to move. I'd need to act. I'd need to contact someone who could help me, someone with legal authority, and the kind of mind that dealt in evidence and proof rather than assumption. Because I didn't just have a confession now, I had science. I had documentation that would hold up in court, in front of a judge, in front of anyone who needed to understand what my son and his wife had done. I had proof, and as I lay back against the pillow, feeling the weight of that letter against my heart, I made a decision. When the nurses did their next rotation, when there was a moment of relative quiet in this ICU room, I was going to find a phone. I was going to call my lawyer, and I was going to make sure that even if Vincent and Natalie thought they'd already won, they were about to learn exactly how wrong they could be. If you're still here, comment, "Still watching." So I know you're still with me. And tell me honestly, if you were in this situation knowing the truth, but having almost no time left, would you stay silent? Or would you take one final step to turn everything around? Also, just a quick note, parts of the story ahead include fictional elements for storytelling and educational purposes. If it's not for you, you can stop here. But if you stay, what comes next might stay with you. The nurse who came to collect my lunch tray was younger than Jennifer, maybe mid-20s, with nervous energy that seemed to fill the small room. I caught her before she could slip back out the door. "Excuse me," I said, and something in my voice made her stop. Maybe it was the fact that I sounded like a man who'd made a decision. "I need to make a phone call." "Is there a way to do that?" She glanced around, like someone might appear to stop her from helping, then nodded. "Of course. I can bring you the phone. Do you need help dialing?" "Just bring it," I said. "I can manage." She was back in 2 minutes with a cordless hospital phone that had probably been used 1,000 times by 1,000 desperate people. I dialed Henry Morrison's number from memory, a number I'd called dozens of times over the past 2 decades, usually from my office, usually to discuss something considerably less urgent than impending murder. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. Morrison Law, his assistant, answered. "Eleanor, I think. Professional and brisk. Oh, Eleanor, this is Charles Hayes. I need Henry. Immediately." Something in my tone must have registered, because she didn't put me on hold or ask if it could wait. Within 10 seconds, Henry was on the line. Charles, what's happened? 20 years. That's how long I'd worked with Henry Morrison, and in all that time I'd learned that he didn't waste words when it mattered. He asked questions that needed asking, and he listened to the answers. He'd helped me navigate the legal complexities of building a tech empire, negotiating contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and navigating the kind of business that required someone smart enough to keep up and ethical enough that I could actually trust him. Now I needed that trust more than I'd ever needed anything. "I'm in Denver Memorial," I said. "I see you, and I need you here within the next 2 hours. This is a life-or-death situation, Henry, and I'm not being metaphorical." There was a pause. Just a brief one. Then, "I'm on my way." "What do I need to know?" "Everything," I said. "But not over the phone. When you get here, come directly to my room. Don't talk to anyone. And Henry..." I paused, wanting to choose my words carefully. My son is trying to kill me. Or has been. It's complicated. Another pause, longer this time. "Charles, are you saying I have evidence, medical evidence, and I have a confession, but I don't have much time, so I need you to move fast. I'll be there in 90 minutes, he said. 1 hour and a half. Don't talk to anyone else until I arrive. Not doctors, not family, not security. Understood. Understood. I hung up, and my hands were still shaking, but it was a different kind of shaking now. Not the tremor of someone falling apart, but the vibration of someone moving into action, something that felt almost like control. I needed to send him the evidence. I couldn't wait to show him the physical letter because I needed him prepared, thinking through the angles before he arrived. I asked the nervous young nurse to bring me my phone. I'd managed to keep it on me despite the hospital's general resistance to patient electronics, and I took a photo of the Boulder Medical Lab's letter. The image came out slightly blurry, but the text was readable. The numbers were visible. The clinical language that confirmed everything Vincent had been doing to me was captured in digital form. I texted it to Henry with a brief message: Levorphanol, 4 times therapeutic dose, accumulated over months. Will explain in person. CH. His response came back within 30 seconds. Received. Do not discuss with anyone. I'm getting in my car now. I deleted the text thread immediately. Then I sat back against my pillows, and I realized I was breathing more easily than I had in days. For the first time since Vincent had sat in that chair and smirked at me, I felt something other than rage or despair. I felt the smallest, most fragile seed of something else. Hope. Because Henry Morrison wasn't just my lawyer. He was a man with a reputation for being meticulous, careful, and brutally effective. He was a man who understood how to protect his clients' interests. And more importantly, he was a man who, when you told him that your son was trying to kill you, didn't ask you to prove it was true. He asked when he could get involved. The next 90 minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. I watched the clock on the hospital wall move with what seemed like deliberate lethargy. The machines beeped. Nurses came and went. A doctor I didn't recognize checked my blood pressure and made a note on my chart without saying much of anything, and I waited. At 2:47 p.m., Henry Morrison walked through my door like a man on a mission. He was in his early 50s, silver threading through his dark hair, wearing a charcoal suit that somehow managed to look less expensive and more authoritative than anything Vincent owned. His eyes took in the room in a single sweep, the IV, the monitors, me lying there in a hospital gown, looking like something the tide had washed up. "Charles," he said simply. "Then tell me everything." And I did. Henry didn't waste time on pleasantries. He pulled the visitor's chair close to my bed, set his briefcase on the side table, and reached for the Boulder Medical Lab's letter I'd been clutching, like it was made of gold. "Show me," he said simply. I unfolded it, and he read through it carefully, his eyes moving methodically across each line. I watched his face as he did, saw the slight tightening around his mouth, the way his jaw worked slightly, like he was processing more than just words on a page. "Levorphanol," he said when he'd finished. "That's not something you accidentally ingest." "No," I agreed. "It's not." He set the letter down and looked at me directly. "Tell me everything. Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." So I did. I told him about the tea, about Natalie's daily visits with that careful smile and those ceramic cups, about the way Vincent would show up and ask how I was feeling, his eyes watching like he was taking notes. I told him about the symptoms I'd dismissed as aging, the fatigue, the nausea, the way my hands had started to shake. I told him about the night Vincent had come into my room with that locked door and that glass-breaking smile and confessed to poisoning me for 3 months. Henry listened without interrupting. His fingers were steepled together, and his eyes never left my face. When I finished, he sat back slightly considering. "Gee, they've made mistakes," he said finally. "The first one was telling you. The second one was assuming you couldn't do anything about it." "There's more," I said, and I told him about the private blood test, the P.O. box, the way I'd known something was wrong weeks before Vincent had walked into my room and confirmed it. "That's good," Henry said. "That shows intent on your part. Planning, awareness, mental acuity." He paused. "Which brings me to the next problem." He stood up, walked to his briefcase, and pulled out a document folder. His movements were methodical, controlled. Everything about Henry Morrison screamed lawyer, the way he held himself, the precision of his gestures. He flipped through the folder until he found what he was looking for, then returned to my bedside. This is your current will," he said, holding it up. "Dated 7 years ago. Very straightforward. Everything goes to your son Vincent. All assets, all accounts, all property. In case of his death, everything goes to your wife, Natalie." The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so grotesque. $75 million, I said quietly. "Approximately," Henry confirmed. "More actually if you count the property portfolio and the tech company equity. Vincent just tried to poison you for the majority of that sum, and if he succeeds, he inherits every penny of it. Which is why we need to change it," I said. "Immediately." Henry agreed. He pulled a legal pad from his briefcase and uncapped a pen. "But we need to do this carefully. The moment Vincent realizes you've changed your will, he'll panic. And a panicked man who's already tried to kill you once becomes unpredictable. So we need to make sure that when this will is read, it's ironclad, unimpeachable. There's no room for Vincent to challenge it, to claim you were coerced, to argue that you weren't mentally competent when you made this decision." "How do we do that?" "We get witnesses, credible ones. We get a notary. We document your mental state, a psychiatric evaluation if possible, though we'll need to be subtle about that. And most importantly," he paused and looked directly at me, "we get video. We record you making this decision, stating your reasons, demonstrating that you're lucid, rational, and of sound mind." "Will that work?" I asked. "It will make it nearly impossible for anyone to challenge," he said. "Especially if the psychiatric evaluation confirms what I can already see, that you're thinking clearly, that you understand the implications of your decision, and that you're making this of your own free will." I nodded slowly. 5 days. That's all I had, and somehow we were going to have to fit all of this into that window. But looking at Henry, at the quiet confidence in his bearing, at the way he was already planning 3 moves ahead, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't alone in this anymore, Monsieur Succombe. "There's one more thing," Henry said, and his pen was poised over the legal pad. "We need to know where this money is going. You can't just say, 'not to Vincent.' Courts like clear intent, clear beneficiaries. So who?" I took a breath. I'd been thinking about this since the moment I'd understood what Vincent and Natalie had done. I'd been thinking about legacy, about what mattered, about what my life had been building toward, if not just the accumulation of wealth. The Denver Children's Hospital Foundation. I said. Henry's pen moved, writing it down. All of it, I confirmed. He looked up from the pad, and there was something almost like respect in his eyes. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. Like he'd seen a lot of people in my situation, and most of them had wanted their money to go to other people like themselves. But here I was, choosing to give it to children who had nothing to do with me. Children I'd never meet, children whose lives might be saved because of something that tried to destroy mine. "That's a hell of a legacy," Henry said quietly. "Let's make sure they get it," I replied. Henry turned back to his legal pad and began to write. His handwriting was careful, precise, every letter formed with deliberate intention. And as I watched him work, I realized that I'd been given something in the last few hours that I hadn't thought I'd have any more, a future. Not in the sense that I'd live forever, or even that my body would heal, but a future that mattered. A future where my death would mean something beyond Vincent and Natalie's bank accounts. A future where I would burn something down after all. just not what I'd originally planned. Henry's fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, the clicking sound filling the quiet of my hospital room. He'd opened his laptop and positioned it so I could see the screen, and now he was translating everything we'd discussed into the formal language of a legal document. "I'm using a template I've refined over 20 years, he said as he typed, not looking away from the screen. "It's airtight. Courts have upheld these in some pretty contentious situations." I watched the words appear on the monitor, row by row, paragraph by paragraph. The opening was simple and direct. "Sakai Charles Robert Hayes, being of sound mind and body and fully aware of the extent and nature of my assets, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament. Sound mind." That phrase was going to matter. Henry had been right about that. Once Vincent found out I'd changed the will, he'd argue everything that I was confused, that I was coerced, that the poison had affected my judgment. We needed every possible safeguard against that. Henry continued typing, and the document began to take shape. Each section was meticulous, detailed, leaving no room for ambiguity or misinterpretation. "Whereas I have come into possession of evidence indicating that certain family members have engaged in conduct designed to harm my health and well-being. And whereas I have determined that my legacy should serve a purpose greater than the enrichment of those individuals." "Stop," I said, and Henry's hands stilled on the keyboard. "Too much?" he asked. "No," I said. "It's perfect. Keep going." He returned to typing. The bulk of the document laid out the specific bequest. The entirety of my estate, including but not limited to all liquid assets. Real property, business interests, investment accounts, and any other assets of monetary or sentimental value, totaling approximately $75 million, shall be transferred in its entirety to the Denver Children's Hospital Foundation, a qualified charitable organization. $75 million. Seeing it written out like that in the clinical language of legal documentation made it real in a way it hadn't been before. I wasn't just making a philosophical statement. I was liquidating my life's work and directing it towards something that had nothing to do with my name, my legacy as I'd traditionally understood it, or anything that would benefit me directly. "Jon, are you sure?" Henry asked, glancing over at me. It wasn't a question about the legality. It was a human question. A lawyer-to-client moment of genuine pause. "I'm sure," and I said. He nodded and added the next crucial passage. "I further declare that my son Vincent Hayes shall receive no inheritance from this estate. This decision is made deliberately and with full understanding of its implications. Vincent Hayes is hereby excluded entirely from the benefits of my will." The words felt heavy, final, but necessary. Henry continued specifying the reasons, carefully worded, to protect me legally without veering into emotional territory that might later be questioned. The language was precise, due to conduct that violates my values and the values I wish my legacy to represent. Not accusations, not proof, just enough to establish intent. The document then moved into the practical details. Henry named himself as executor with specific instructions on how the distribution should occur. He added language that made it clear I understood the tax implications, that I'd received legal counsel, and that I was making this decision of my own volition. "Read this section," Henry said, scrolling down to show me the mental competency clause he'd added. "I declare that at the time of the execution of this will, I am mentally competent, capable of understanding the nature and extent of my assets, aware of the natural objects of my bounty, and fully cognizant of the disposition I am making of my property. I am not under any duress, undue influence, or coercion of any kind." "That's going to be important," Henry said. Combined with the psychiatric evaluation and the video recording, it creates a wall that would be very difficult to breach. If Vincent tries to challenge this will, he'd have to prove that you were not of sound mind at the time of execution, and we're going to document the hell out of the fact that you were. I read through the entire document carefully. It took 20 minutes, Henry walking me through each section explaining the implications, making sure I understood every single word. By the time I'd finished reading it, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of completion, as if I'd finally taken control of something that had been slipping away from me since the moment Natalie brought that first cup of tea. "It's good," Henry asked. "It's perfect," I said. "When do I sign?" "Not yet," Henry said, and he held up a hand before I could protest. "We need to do this in a specific order with specific people present. We need witnesses. We need a notary. We need a psychiatric evaluation, nothing invasive, just someone to confirm your mental state. And we need to record the entire process on video. The stronger the documentation, the harder it will be for anyone to challenge." He closed the laptop and looked directly at me. "We also need to move fast. Vincent's going to notice something is wrong soon. The longer we wait, the more dangerous this becomes." "How soon can we do this?" I asked. "Tonight," Henry said. "If we move now, if we can get the right people here by evening, we can have this finalized by midnight. Then it's done. Then you can breathe." I nodded slowly. 5 days. I'd been given 5 days, and I was going to use every single second of them. Not to rage against the dying of the light, but to make sure that what I left behind mattered more than what Vincent and Natalie had tried to steal. "Let's do it," I said. Henry stood up, already moving into action. "I'm going to make some calls. You rest. And Charles?" He paused in the doorway. "You made the right decision about all of this." After he left, I sat alone with the weight of what I'd just committed to. The document was gone, saved to Henry's secure cloud, but its implications lingered in the room like a presence. $75 million for children I'd never meet, for a hospital that had nothing to do with me, for a future I wouldn't see. It was. I realized the first truly selfless thing I'd done in 64 years, and it felt less like a burden and more like a gift. The evening had an almost ceremonial quality to it, the kind of formality that comes when you're doing something that absolutely has to be done right. Henry had orchestrated it all with military precision. By 5 o'clock, my hospital room had transformed from a place of illness into something that resembled a legal office. He'd arranged for a small desk to be wheeled in, cleared a space for documents, and positioned a video camera on a tripod in the corner. He was taking no chances. Every single moment of what was about to happen would be recorded, documented, and preserved. At 6 o'clock p.m. exactly, there was a knock on the door. Victoria Miller was a woman in her early 40s, professional, in a way that came from doing something competently for a long time. She wore business attire despite the hospital setting, and she carried a leather portfolio that looked like it had handled thousands of documents. She didn't introduce herself with warmth or apology, just straight to business. "Charles Hayes?" she asked, and I nodded. "I'm Victoria Miller, Notary Public for the state of Colorado. Henry Morrison has arranged for me to notarize a will for you this evening. Before we proceed, I need to verify your identity and your understanding of what's happening." She checked my driver's license, asked me to sign a preliminary form, and walked through the entire process step by step. No rushed moments, no assumptions. Everything was deliberate, careful, the way something should be when it's going to matter. "We're also going to have a capacity evaluation," she said, pulling out additional documentation. "That's standard for situations like this." Dr. Michael Thornton arrived minutes later, and I realized this was the first time I'd really looked at him since he'd delivered the news about my liver. He was younger than I'd initially thought, maybe mid-50s, with the kind of careful manner that doctors develop when they've spent years delivering bad news. "I need to ask you some questions," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "Nothing invasive, just to confirm that you're mentally present and capable of making legal decisions." "I understand," I said. "What is today's date?" he asked. "April 2nd, 2025, I answered. "Circusoim. Who is the current president of the United States?" "Donald Trump," I said. He asked me questions about my children, how many I had, their names, what they did. He asked me what year I founded my technology company. He asked me to recall a simple sequence of numbers and repeat them back. He asked me what my understanding was of what I was about to do. I'm changing my will, I said clearly. I'm leaving my entire estate to the Denver Children's Hospital Foundation instead of my son. I understand the implications of this decision. I'm making it of my own free will, and I'm not under any pressure or coercion. Thornton studied me for a moment, and then he nodded. He signed a form certifying that I was, in his professional medical opinion, mentally competent and fully capable of understanding the nature and implications of my legal decisions. That signature was worth more than money. It was armor. Jennifer Cole arrived next, still in her nursing scrubs from her shift. Henry had called her, directly explained what was needed, and asked her to serve as a witness. She'd agreed immediately, and now she stood beside my bed with Martha Williams, the woman who'd kept my house in order for the last 8 years, quiet, efficient Martha, who'd brought me soup when I was sick, and who I was now certain had no idea that the woman she worked for had been poisoning me for months. They both understood what they were being asked to do. Witness a will signing, confirm that I was the person signing it, that I was doing so of my own volition, and that I appeared to be in sound mental state. "This is all being recorded," Victoria Miller said, gesturing to the camera in the corner. "Everything that happens from this moment on is being documented on video. Do you all consent to this recording?" We all agreed, and then, with the kind of solemnity that usually accompanies something far more momentous, I signed the new will. My signature was shaky, my hands were weak, the liver damage seeing to that, but it was unmistakably mine. I signed 3 times in 3 different places, each signature witnessed by the same 2 women who watched me with expressions of quiet support. Jennifer and Martha signed as witnesses. Thornton signed again, confirming the moment. Victoria Miller signed as the notary, her official seal, making an impression on the pages that was somehow both simple and absolute. The entire process took 45 minutes. When it was finished, when all the papers had been signed, and the video had captured every moment, Victoria carefully gathered everything together and placed it in a protective folder. She handed it to Henry with the kind of reverence usually reserved for ancient artifacts. "This is solid," she said. "If anyone tries to challenge this will, they're going to have a very hard time doing it." After everyone had left, after the room had returned to its normal hospital quietness, Henry took the original will and walked to a safe deposit box he'd apparently arranged access to, something about attorney-client privileges and the security of important documents. He returned 20 minutes later, and he simply said, "It's secure. This will cannot be challenged, Charles. Not successfully. The video, the psychiatric evaluation, the witnesses, the notarization, it's all there. If Vincent tries to fight this, he loses." I nodded slowly, feeling something settle inside me. Not peace exactly, but a kind of closure to this particular chapter. I'd done everything I could to protect what I was leaving behind. The rest was out of my hands. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now," Henry said, checking his watch. "We wait, and we prepare for the next part, which is making sure Vincent and Natalie don't suspect what you've done until the moment it becomes impossible for them to stop it." The morning of day 2 arrived with a cold, pale light that crept across the linoleum floor of my ICU room. I lay there practicing the art of appearing defeated. It was a role I had to play, the dying patriarch, the fading light of a tech empire, the man who was supposedly too weak to notice the vultures circling his bed. But beneath the thin hospital blanket, my mind was a high-speed processor running calculations that had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with survival. At 9:15 a.m., the door clicked shut. Henry Morrison was back. He didn't carry a briefcase today. Instead, he had the quiet, focused energy of a man who had just lit a fuse and was waiting for the explosion. He pulled his chair close to the railing of my bed, leaning in so his voice wouldn't carry past the heavy door. "The gears are turning, Charles," he whispered. "I met with Richard Hastings at dawn." Richard Hastings. I knew the name, of course. He was a high-ranking prosecutor in the city, a man known for a glass-sharp intellect and a total lack of patience for those who thought they were above the law. Henry told me that when Hastings opened the folder we had prepared, the room went silent for a long time. Hastings had looked at all the lab reports from Boulder showing the astronomical levels of that palliative care compound, in my system, the video recording of my new will, and the detailed notes of Vincent's midnight confession. According to Henry, the prosecutor didn't just see a family dispute. He saw a calculated attempt to end a human life for 75 million pieces of silver. He saw a conspiracy, an attempt to defraud an estate, and a cold-blooded plan to accelerate my departure from this world. My Hastings isn't playing around. Henry said, his eyes dark with a grim sort of satisfaction. He's officially opened a file. He called it a systematic attempt to compromise a life. He's assigned his best asset to lead the groundwork. That asset was a man named Marcus Coleman. Who is he? I asked, my voice a raspy shadow of its former self. Private investigator, 42 years old, former lead detective with the city's major crimes unit, Henry explained. He left the force a few years ago because he was tired of the red tape, but Hastings still uses him when he needs someone who can move fast and talk to people who don't want to be found. Coleman is a bloodhound, Charles. He's already started. Through Henry's report, I could almost see Coleman moving through the city. He wasn't just some hired hand. He was a specialist in tracing the untraceable. While I sat trapped in this bed, Coleman was out there becoming my hands and feet. His first stop was the hospital's security hub. He was currently pulling 3 months' worth of high-definition footage from the hallways, the elevators, and the entrances. He wanted to see every single time Vincent and Natalie had walked through those doors. He wanted to see what they were carrying, who they spoke to in the cafeteria, and if they ever lingered too long near the pharmaceutical storage areas. Coleman thinks there's a leak in the supply chain. Henry continued, his voice low and steady. That specific compound, the one that's been doing the damage, it doesn't just appear in a kitchen. Someone had to provide the high-concentration vials. Coleman is cross-referencing the hospital's pharmacy logs with the staff schedules. He's looking for a connection, a debt, a friendship, anything that ties Vincent to the people who handle the medication. I closed my eyes, picturing the vast network of the hospital. It was a city within a city, thousands of people moving through the veins of this building every day. Somewhere in that crowd was a person who had accepted a bribe to help my son destroy me. Someone had prepared those herbal blends. Someone had looked at a vial meant for pain relief and decided it was worth more as a weapon. What about the local pharmacies? I asked. Coleman is on it, Henry assured me. He's checking every specialized apothecary in the Denver area. He's looking for unauthorized prescriptions or lost inventory. He told Hastings that people like Vincent always think they're being clever by using rare substances, but rare substances leave a much clearer trail than common ones. You can't hide a mountain, Charles. I felt a strange, cold shiver of relief. For months I had been the one under the microscope, watching my own health disintegrate while my family watched with practiced sympathy. Now the lens had flipped. Now the light was being shined on them, on their movements, their secrets, and their greed. The investigation was no longer just a theory or a hope. It was a living, breathing entity. It was an official hunt. Hastings wants to keep this quiet for another 48 hours, Henry warned. We don't want Vincent to know the law is behind him until we have the supplier in custody. If he smells a trap, he might try to finish what he started, or he might run. For now, he needs to believe you are still fading away. I nodded, the movement stiff and painful. I can play the ghost a little longer, Henry. She's good. Because once Coleman finds the link, once he identifies the person providing the vials, the trap will snap shut. We have the what from the lab results. Now we are getting the how and the who. When Henry finally stood up to leave the room, felt different. The clinical whiteness of the walls didn't feel quite so much like a tomb anymore. It felt like a bunker. Outside these walls, a former detective was stripping away the layers of my son's lies, and a powerful prosecutor was sharpening the blade of the law. I was still weak. I was still a man with a damaged organ and a ticking clock. But as I watched the door close behind my lawyer, I felt a spark of the old fire, the one that had built my company, from a garage startup into a multi-billion-dollar force. I wasn't just waiting to depart anymore. I was waiting for the results. I was waiting for the moment the predator realized he had become the prey. The beeping of the monitor seemed a little faster, a little more rhythmic, like a drumbeat in the distance signaling the approach of a reckoning that Vincent Hayes never saw coming. I leaned back into the pillows, staring at the ceiling, and for the first time in 3 months, I let myself imagine a world where I actually made it to the end of the week. Not to save my life, but to see justice served. The investigation was open, the hunt was on, and all I had to do was stay alive long enough to watch them fall. Day 3 began with a heaviness in my chest that had nothing to do with the failing organ inside me. It was the weight of anticipation. I was a man suspended in time, caught between the clinical beep of my monitors and the silent, invisible machinery of a criminal investigation. Henry arrived later than usual, his face etched with the kind of fatigue that comes from staring at flickering screens for too many hours. But behind the exhaustion, there was a spark, a predatory gleam I hadn't seen before. He wasn't alone. Marcus Coleman followed him in carrying a thin leather portfolio that looked remarkably heavy with secrets. We spent the night in the security basement. Marcus said, his voice low and gravelly. He didn't sit. He stood by the window, his eyes scanning the hallway through the glass insert of my door before he continued. 3 months of digital footprints. Thousands of hours of footage. It's amazing what people think they can hide in plain sight when they believe no one is looking. I leaned back, my pulse thudding in my neck. What did the glass eyes see, Marcus? He opened the portfolio and pulled out a stack of high-resolution stills, laying them out on my overbed table like a deck of tarot cards, predicting a very dark future. The pattern is consistent, Marcus explained, pointing to the first image. It was time-stamped 10 weeks ago. There was Vincent impeccably dressed as always, carrying a thermos and a ceramic cup. Every visit he brings the gift. He's careful to keep it in his hand, never letting the staff take it. He walks into your room, and 10 minutes later, he walks out with the cup empty. The next set of photos showed Natalie. She looked different on camera, less like the doting daughter-in-law, and more like a ghost haunting the corridors. In several frames, she was seen lingering near the nursing station, waiting for a distraction. When the nurses were occupied with a shift change or an emergency, she would slip into my room. She wasn't carrying flowers or magazines. She was carrying those small, innocuous-looking jars of what she called herbal supplements. She's the delivery system, Henry whispered. But the delivery system needs a warehouse. Marcus tapped a larger, grainier photo. This one wasn't from the hallway outside my room. It was from the restricted access area of the hospital's pharmaceutical wing. The lighting was sterile, the shelves lined with thousands of vials of life-saving and life-ending substances. This is where it gets interesting, Marcus said. Meet Victoria Cross. In the frame, a woman in a lab coat was standing in front of a chemical storage cabinet. She was thin, her shoulders hunched as if she were trying to occupy as little space as possible. She was looking over her shoulder, her eyes wide and darting. I watched as she reached into a cabinet marked with high-risk warning labels. She pulled out several small glass vials, the kind used for concentrated palliative care medications, and moved to a side table. Look at her hands, Charles, Marcus noted. In the next sequence of stills, Victoria was carefully peeling off the original pharmaceutical labels and replacing them. She was using a handheld label maker. Marcus zoomed in on one of the printed strips. It didn't say levorphenol or high concentration. It simply said, herbal tea extract. My stomach turned. The cold, calculated nature of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just brought me bad tea. They had manufactured a counterfeit product inside a world-class medical facility. She's a pharmacy technician, Henry added. She has the keys, the access, and the knowledge. And every Tuesday and Thursday at 11 p.m. after her shift ends, she meets someone in the rear parking lot near the oxygen tank refills. The final photo in the stack was the most damning. It showed the shadows of the parking garage. A figure in a dark hoodie, unmistakably Vincent, even with the face partially obscured, was standing next to Victoria Cross. She was handing him a small padded envelope. He was handing her something that looked very much like a thick roll of currency. They weren't even creative about it. Marcus said, his voice dripping with professional disdain. It's a classic handoff. She provides the raw materials from the hospital's own inventory. He provides the funding, and Natalie provides the administration. They've been running a miniature pharmaceutical lab right under our noses. I stared at the images. My son. My wife's partner. A stranger in a lab coat. They had formed a committee to decide when my heart should stop beating. They had turned my own place of healing into a factory for my destruction. The frame is complete. Charles. Marcus said, gathering the photos and sliding them back into his portfolio. I've sent these digital captures directly to Hastings. He's already preparing the warrants. But we have a tactical problem. What problem? I asked. Our Victoria Cross. Marcus said, his eyes narrowing. She's the weak point. She's not a career criminal. She's a technician who's clearly terrified. If we can get to her before Vincent realizes the walls are closing in, we can turn her. She's the only one who can testify to the exact chemical composition of what was in those vials. She's the bridge between the intent and the act. Where is she now? I managed to say, the anger giving my voice a sudden sharp edge. She's on the night shift starting this evening, Marcus replied, checking his watch. I'm going to find her. I don't want the uniformed police to do it too much noise. I need to get to her first alone and show her exactly how much of her life is currently captured on my hard drive. Henry nodded in agreement. If Marcus can flip her, Vincent and Natalie won't have a leg to stand on. They'll be trapped by their own supplier. Marcus Coleman turned toward the door, his movements quick and purposeful. He looked like a man who was done watching and ready to start hunting. Rest, Mr. Hayes, Marcus said over his shoulder. By tomorrow morning, I plan to have Victoria Cross telling us every single secret she's been keeping in that pharmacy. As the door clicked shut behind him, the silence of the room felt different. The photos were gone, but the images were burned into my retinas. Vincent in the shadows, Victoria with her labels, Natalie with her ceramic cups. They thought they were invisible, tucked away in the blind spots of the world. They didn't realize that when you build an empire, you learn exactly where the cameras are. I leaned back, closing my eyes, and for the first time I didn't feel like a patient. I felt like a witness. And the testimony was already written in pixels and light. Marcus was on the move. The key was in the lock. And very soon, the door to their freedom was going to swing shut forever. The afternoon of day 3 felt like the deep breath before a plunge. While I sat in my room staring at the sterile drip of the IV, Marcus Coleman was moving through the belly of the hospital, heading toward the pharmaceutical wing. Henry had stayed behind with me, his eyes constantly checking the door, his phone vibrating with encrypted updates. Through those updates, I could practically see the scene unfolding. Marcus didn't go in with sirens or a squad of uniformed officers. That wasn't his style. He knew that fear was a delicate instrument. If you struck it too hard, it would shatter into silence. But if you played it just right, it would sing. Victoria Cross was at her station, surrounded by the hum of industrial refrigerators and the clinical scent of chemical compounds. She was a silhouette of nerves, her hands fumbling with a tray of medication, when Marcus stepped into the restricted area. He didn't rush her. He didn't put his hand on his holster. He simply stood there watching her for a moment, letting the silence do the initial work. "Victoria," he said softly. She jumped the plastic tray, clattering against the stainless steel counter. She looked at Marcus, a man who looked like the very embodiment of the law she had been breaking, and the color drained from her face so fast it was as if a plug had been pulled. You're not supposed to be in here." She stammered, her voice thin and brittle like dry leaves. Marcus stepped closer, maintaining a calm, almost compassionate demeanor. He didn't look like a hunter. He looked like a man offering a life raft to someone who was already underwater. "My name is Marcus Coleman. I'm a private investigator working directly with the district attorney's office," he said, his voice low and steady. He pulled out a small tablet and tilted it toward her. It showed a frozen frame from the security footage, the exact moment she had been swapping labels on those vials. "I know everything, Victoria. I know about the late-night meetings in the parking lot. I know about the envelopes Vincent Hayes has been giving you. And I know exactly what was inside those containers you labeled as herbal tea." Victoria didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply collapsed onto a nearby stool, her breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. Her eyes were fixed on the screen, staring at the undeniable proof of her own undoing. I didn't want to," she whispered, her hands beginning to shake violently. Marcus leaned against the counter, not to loom over her, but to be on her level. This was the compassionate pressure Henry had talked about. "I believe you," Marcus said, and for a moment he probably did. He saw a woman who had been cornered by her own mistakes. "But here is the reality of your situation, Victoria. Vincent Hayes has been using you to systematically dismantle the health of his father, CEO Charles Hayes. That makes you a primary accomplice in a very serious criminal attempt to end a life. If we walk out of here and I hand this over to the police, you will be arrested before you can even take off that lab coat. You will face decades behind bars." He paused, letting the weight of that word decades sink into the quiet hum of the pharmacy. "But," Marcus continued, his voice dropping an octave, "there is a second choice. If you cooperate with me right now, if you tell the truth, provide the records, and help us put the architects of this plan where they belong, I can promise you that Prosecutor Richard Hastings will be inclined to listen. We aren't looking for you, Victoria. We're looking for the ones who paid you. If you become our key witness, we can discuss a significant reduction in your charges, maybe even a way out." The silence that followed was heavy. I could almost hear her internal struggle through Henry's description. She was a woman standing on a crumbling bridge, looking at the abyss on one side, and a narrow, difficult path on the other. Victoria looked up, her eyes swimming in tears. One rolled down her pale cheek, leaving a glistening trail in the harsh, fluorescent light. "He threatened me," she sobbed, her voice breaking. "Vincent, he said he'd ruin me if I didn't help. He's so powerful. I thought I didn't have a choice." "You have one now," Marcus said gently. "The only choice that matters. Do you want to be a casualty of his greed, or do you want to help us stop him?" Victoria took a long, shuddering breath. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and nodded a small, jerky movement of her head. I'll help," she whispered. "I'll tell you everything. I have the logs. I kept copies of the formulas he asked for. I was so scared I'd get blamed, I saved everything." Marcus didn't waste a second. He pulled out his phone and hit a speed dial number. "Hastings, it's Coleman. I'm at the pharmacy. I have her, and she's ready to talk." Henry put his phone down and looked at me. A slow, grim smile spread across his face, the first real smile I'd seen since I woke up in this ICU bed. "She flipped Charles," Henry said. "Marcus is bringing her to a secure room now. Hastings is on his way to meet them. The bridge has been crossed." I felt a surge of adrenaline that no hospital medication could ever provide. The pharmacy technician, the one who had literally held my life in her glass vials, was now the one who would hold the keys to Vincent's cell. "Is she talking yet?" I asked. "She's starting," Henry replied. "Marcus says she's terrified, but she's being thorough. She's giving them names, dates, and the exact chemical breakdown of the toxins she's been supplying." I lay back against the pillows, closing my eyes. I could almost hear her voice in the distance, a quiet, tearful confession that was systematically dismantling the empire of lies my son had built. Victoria Cross, the woman who had been an instrument of my destruction, was now becoming the instrument of my justice. The shadows in the room seemed to lift just a little. The clinical beeping of the monitor didn't sound like a countdown anymore. It sounded like a heartbeat, strong and steady, waiting for the final act to begin. The investigation had its star witness. The puzzle was almost complete. And somewhere in this building, the woman who knew all the secrets was finally starting to tell the truth. The recordings that Marcus played back for me later that evening were haunting. Through the speaker of a small encrypted device, I heard the voice of the woman who had been the silent architect of my physical decay. Victoria Cross didn't sound like a criminal mastermind. She sounded like a person whose soul had been crushed under a mountain of specialized glass and high-stakes threats. "He found me at a time when I was drowning." Victoria's voice began thin and trembling, punctuated by the sharp intake of breath that comes with uncontrolled sobbing. "My sister was sick, the medical bills were piling up, and I had made a mistake. I had taken some expired medication from the disposal bin to help her. It was illegal, I knew it, but I was desperate." She went on to describe the day Vincent Hayes walked into the pharmacy wing. He didn't come for a prescription. He came with a photograph of her taking those expired vials. He didn't ask for a bribe. He demanded a service. He told me that if I didn't help him, he would ensure I spent the next 10 years in a federal cell. She choked out. He said he owned the board of directors, that he could make me disappear from the medical world forever. "I'm just a technician. I'm a nobody." I was so terrified that I couldn't even think. He didn't just want medication. He wanted a specific concentrated formulation of a palliative care compound. He had the chemical sheets ready. He knew exactly what dose would be enough to cause a slow, irreversible decline of the vital organs, without triggering the standard toxicology alerts. As I listened, I felt a coldness settle in my marrow. My own son had researched the chemistry of my end. He had mapped out the destruction of my liver with the same precision he used for a quarterly budget. For 3 months, I prepared the vials. Victoria continued, her voice gaining a frantic edge of guilt. "Every Tuesday and Thursday, I would draw the concentrated fluid from the hospital's secure stock and replace the labels with those herbal tea stickers he provided. I told myself it was for a research project. I told myself he was just trying to help his father manage pain privately. I lied to myself because the truth was too heavy to carry. But the lies had started to crumble the moment I was admitted to the ICU. Victoria described the day she saw my name on the critical patient list. She had stood outside my door watching through the small glass window as the machines fought to keep me breathing. "I saw him," she sobbed, and I could hear the sound of her hands striking the table in the interrogation room. "I saw Mr. Hayes. He looked so small, so fragile. And then I saw Vincent standing over him, smiling that horrible, hollow smile. It wasn't about pain management. It was about an ending. I realized then that Charles Hayes was an innocent victim. He wasn't a patient. He was a target. He didn't deserve to fade away in the dark just because his son wanted a larger bank account." Victoria's confession then turned to Natalie. She described how Natalie would meet her in the staff lounge, always checking her reflection in the mirror, always impeccably composed. Natalie would take the vials with a cold, business-like efficiency, slipping them into her designer handbag as if they were nothing more than a new shade of lipstick. Natalie knew. Victoria whispered, the guilt finally overriding her fear. She was the one who told me which blends hid the bitterness of the compound best. She was the one who joked about how stubborn the CEO was and how he needed to rest more. They were partners in every sense of the word. They turned a man's home and his hospital room into a cage. The weight of her words felt like a physical pressure on my chest. Victoria Cross had lived in a state of constant suffocating guilt for 90 days. She had watched the light leave my eyes from a distance, knowing she was the one providing the darkness. "I can't take it back," she told the prosecutor, her voice finally dropping to a hollow, exhausted tone. "I can't fix what I broke inside that man, but I won't let them win. I won't let them walk away while he pays the ultimate price." "Are you prepared to state this under oath?" Victoria Hastings' voice cut in professional and grave. "Are you willing to stand before a judge and recount every vial, every meeting, and every threat?" There was a long silence on the recording. I held my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Yes," she said, her voice finally finding a sliver of strength. "I will testify. I will give you the logs, the messages, and the labels. I'll tell the court everything, just please don't let them get near him again." The recording ended with the sound of a chair scraping against the floor. I lay in the dark, the silence of my ICU room feeling heavier than before. Henry sat beside me, his silhouette dark against the city lights outside. "She's ours, Charles," Henry said quietly. "Her testimony is the final nail. She's not just a witness. She's the person who handed them the weapon. When she speaks, the jury won't just see a crime. They'll see a betrayal of the highest order." I nodded, feeling a strange mixture of pity and grim satisfaction. Victoria Cross was a victim of Vincent's manipulation, but she was also the key to his downfall. She had chosen the difficult path of truth over the easy path of silence. The guilt that had been drowning her was now the current that would sweep Vincent and Natalie away. I had 5 days to live, according to the doctors. But with Victoria's commitment to testify, I knew that those 5 days would be enough. I was an innocent man who had been marked for disposal. But the woman who prepared the poison was now the woman who would deliver the justice. The act was almost over. The stage was set for the reckoning. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was dying. I felt like I was winning. The hum of the ICU ward at 2 a.m. is a lonely sound. But tonight it felt like the quiet before a storm. Henry sat in the shadows of my room, his face illuminated by the pale blue light of his tablet. He was listening to the raw audio from the interrogation room, the final definitive nail in the coffin of my son's freedom. Through his headphones, shared with me via a splitter, I heard the voice of Victoria Cross dismantling the world I thought I knew. "It started 3 months ago." Victoria's voice crackled, sounding hollow but resolute. Vincent Hayes approached me with a folder. It wasn't just a request. It was a manual. He gave me the exact chemical formula for a high-concentration palliative compound. He knew the dosage, the half-life, and the metabolic impact on the liver. He didn't just stumble into this. He had researched how to end a life with clinical precision. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. My son, the man I had raised to lead, had spent his time studying how to destroy my vital organs. But I wasn't alone. Victoria continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I couldn't get the raw materials from the high-security vault by myself. That's where Margaret Foster came in. She's a senior pharmacist in the hospital's central dispensary. Vincent paid her. He said he'd taken care of her debts. Margaret was the one who actually prepared the vials from the base ingredients. She's the expert. She knew exactly what she was brewing." Henry looked at me, his expression grim. I realized then that the rot went deeper than I had imagined. It wasn't just a family betrayal. It was a small, focused cell of corruption operating inside the very institution meant to save me. Margaret would hand me the clear glass vials during our shift changes, Victoria explained. My job was the camouflage. I had a portable printer, I would wrap each vial in a custom label that said, "Organic Herbal Extract, Daily Supplement." It was a joke to them. A dark, sick joke. Vincent would come by the rear loading dock or sometimes meet me near the pharmacy entrance to collect the tea. He was always so calm. He'd check the labels, nod, and slide them into his pocket, like he was picking up a dry cleaning receipt. The audio captured the sound of paper rustling, likely photos or logs being presented by Prosecutor Hastings. And Natalie, Hastings' voice was a low rumble on the tape. Natalie was the final step. Victoria sobbed. Vincent told me she was the administrator. She would take the vials home or bring them here to the hospital. She'd mix the concentrated liquid into those ceramic cups, masked with honey and actual herbal leaves. She told Mr. Hayes it was for his longevity and stamina. She did it every single day for 90 days. Vincent actually complained to me once. He said the plan was supposed to take 2 or 3 weeks. He was frustrated that his father's heart was too stubborn and his health was too resilient. He hadn't expected it to take 3 months for the organ failure to set in. My stubborn health. I had fought to stay strong for my company, for my family, and that very strength had been an inconvenience to my own son. He had been checking his watch, wondering why I wasn't dead yet. The symptoms finally started showing up in the blood work 2 weeks ago. Victoria said, her voice trembling. The yellowing of the eyes, the extreme fatigue. That was the goal. Vincent was jubilant. He said the finish line was in sight. He didn't care about the pain he was causing. He only cared about the timeline. The recording went quiet for a moment, save for the sound of a pen scratching against paper. I have the logs here. Victoria said, her voice finally steady. I kept a digital record of every batch Margaret prepared and every vial I labeled. I have the messages from Vincent confirming the tea deliveries. I'm giving it all to you. I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I don't want his blood on my hands. You are making the right choice, Victoria, Hastings responded. By signing these transcripts and providing these logs, you are officially a cooperating witness. You will be placed under protective oversight. Your cooperation today is the only thing standing between you and a life sentence for conspiracy and attempted tuok jopat mangsong. There was the sound of a heavy stamp hitting a page, then the scratch of a signature. Henry pulled the headphones away and looked at me. The blue light of the tablet made him look like a phantom, but his eyes were very much alive. We have it all, Charles, he whispered. The supplier, the chemist, and the delivery system. Margaret Foster's name on that transcript is the bridge we needed to the hospital's internal records. Hastings is already coordinating with the authorities to freeze their movements. They have the recording, they have the signed confession, and they have the digital trail. I lay back, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me, yet I felt a strange, cold lightness. The puzzle was finished. The tea that Natalie had brought me with a kiss on the cheek was now a documented weapon. The son who had sat at the foot of my bed and lied about my recovery was now a recorded criminal. It's over, isn't it? I asked. The investigation part is, Henry replied, his voice firm. Now comes the enforcement. Hastings has enough to move. Vincent and Natalie think they are waiting for a funeral. They have no idea they are actually waiting for a cage. I closed my eyes. The image of the herbal labels flashed in my mind, a mundane domestic lie used to hide a lethal intent. My liver was failing, yes, but my mind was clearer than it had ever been. I had 5 days, the doctor said. I didn't need 5 days to die. I only needed them to see the truth come for those who had tried to bury me. Hastings had the proof. Henry had the daichuk. And I, Charles Hayes, finally had the one thing Vincent had tried so hard to take away, the last word. The morning of day 4 was silent, but it was the silence of a predator waiting for the trap to spring. I lay in my ICU bed, my body feeling like a hollow shell, but my mind was a beacon of cold, hard light. Henry arrived at 8 a.m. He didn't sit down this time. He stood by the window checking his watch with the precision of a man timing a demolition. "It's done, Charles," he said, his voice a low vibration in the quiet room. "The courier is at Vincent's doorstep right now. Hand delivered. Signature required." I closed my eyes, imagining the scene. My son likely sitting in his sun-drenched breakfast nook, perhaps sipping a coffee he hadn't had to prepare himself, thinking about the millions that were supposed to flow into his accounts in less than 48 hours. I could almost feel the vibration of the doorbell through the hospital floor. The letter Henry had drafted was a masterpiece of legal brutality. It didn't accuse. It didn't shout. It simply stated facts with the finality of a judge's gavel. According to Henry's later report from the courier's confirmation and the frantic digital trail that followed, the letter read, "To Vincent Hayes, from Henry Morrison, counsel for Charles Hayes. Dear Mr. Hayes, I am writing to formally notify you that my client Charles Hayes has executed a new last will and testament as of April 2nd, 2025. This document was finalized under the supervision of a licensed notary public, witnessed by credible third parties, and supported by a contemporaneous medical evaluation confirming Mr. Hayes's full mental capacity and legal competency. Under the terms of this new instrument, the entirety of the estate, valued at approximately $75 million, has been bequeathed in full to the Denver Children's Hospital Foundation. This bequest includes all liquid assets, real property, and business interests. Consequently, the previous will, which designated you as the primary beneficiary, is hereby revoked and rendered null and void. Should you have any inquiries regarding this matter, please direct them to my office. Do not attempt to contact my client directly. Sincerely, Henry Morrison, Esquire." "He's read it by now," Henry said, checking his phone. A notification blinked a confirmation of delivery. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The $75 million shield was now officially in place. Vincent's motive, the very reason he had spent 3 months feeding me toxins, had been erased in a single paragraph. Through the investigators and the intercepted communication logs that Hastings's team was now monitoring in real time, the reaction was immediate and violent. Vincent didn't just read the letter. He disintegrated. According to the reports, he had turned a ghostly shade of gray, the paper trembling so hard in his hand that he nearly tore it. The mask of the successful patient, heir apparent, was gone. In its place was a man who realized he had committed a capital crime for a prize that no longer existed. He called Natalie within 3 minutes. Henry reported reading from a secure transcript provided by Marcus Coleman's team. He was nearly incoherent. He told her the old man had flipped the board. Hakirikas, he told her everything was gone, the house, the money, the future they had mapped out in Bora Bora. I could almost hear Natalie's voice on the other end of that line, sharp, calculating, and suddenly filled with the realization that she had been brewing herbal tea for a man who had just outmaneuvered them from his deathbed. "What did she say?" I asked, my voice a dry rasp. "She told him they had to get to the hospital," Henry said. "She told him they had to find a way to make you understand, to make you change it back. She actually suggested that you were confused by the medication and that Henry Morrison had coerced you. She's still trying to play the game, Charles. She doesn't realize the board has been burned." Well, but Vincent knew. Even through his panic, he understood the significance of the notary and the medical evaluation mentioned in the letter. He knew that if Henry Morrison had put his name on that document, it was ironclad. The reports described Vincent pacing his living room like a caged animal throwing a crystal decanter against the wall, shouting about his money. He was in a state of total blind desperation. The $75 million wasn't just a number to him. It was the only thing that made him feel powerful. And now it was going to save the lives of children he had never met. "He's coming here, isn't he?" I asked. "He's already in his car," Henry replied. "But he won't get past the door. Marcus has security stationed at the elevators, and Hastings is waiting for the right moment to intercept. Let him stew in his own failure for a few hours. The more he panics, the more mistakes he'll make. I lay back, feeling a strange, hollow sense of victory. My son was experiencing the very thing he had tried to inflict on me, the loss of everything he held dear. He had tried to take my life. I had taken his future. The weight of the betrayal still ached in my bones, but the sight of Henry standing there calm and resolute reminded me that I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was the architect of a different kind of ending. Vincent Hayes, the man who thought he was smarter than the father who built an empire, was currently speeding through the streets of Denver, clutching a letter that proved he was nothing more than a failed thief. He was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, realizing too late that even a dying man can still strike a killing blow in a court of law. "He's desperate, Charles," Henry said, looking at me with a mixture of pity and steel. "A desperate man is a loud man, and we want him as loud as possible." I nodded, the clinical beep of the heart monitor sounding like a countdown. Day 4. The letter had been delivered, the panic had set in, and the $75 million was finally safe, destined for a building that would bear my name for all the right reasons. I closed my eyes and waited for the sound of my son's footsteps in the hall, knowing that for the first time in 3 months, he was the one who was truly running out of time. The afternoon of Day 4 felt different in the ICU. The air was heavy, charged with the static of a storm that was finally breaking. I lay in my bed, staring at the muted news on the television, but my mind was miles away inside the mahogany-lined office of Henry Morrison. Thanks to a discreet audio link Henry had established before he left, I was a silent witness to the final collapse of my son's empire of greed. The sound of the heavy office doors being thrown open echoed through the speaker. I heard the frantic, heavy breathing of a man who had run out of road. "Henry, what the hell is this?" Vincent's voice was a jagged blade, raw with a mixture of terror and fury. I could almost see him standing there, his face flushed, clutching the crumpled letter like a weapon that had misfired in his hand. This new will. It's a fraud. It's a blatant case of elder abuse and coercion. My father is in the ICU. He's dying. He's not in his right mind. There was a moment of profound silence. I could picture Henry sitting behind his massive oak desk, his hands folded, his expression as unmoving as granite. "Sit down, Vincent." Henry said, his voice a calm, low-frequency hum that seemed to make the room even colder. "I'm not sitting down," Vincent screamed. "I'm going to have you disbarred. You took advantage of a confused, medicated old man to divert $75 million to a charity. My money. You forced him to sign that paper. No one forced him. Vincent." Henry replied, his tone devoid of emotion. "In fact, your father has never been more lucid. I have a high-definition video of the entire signing process. It includes a full-capacity evaluation by Dr. Thornton, 2 independent witnesses, and a licensed notary. In that video, Charles clearly explains why he is disinheriting you. He speaks about the betrayal. He speaks about the tea. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear Vincent's breath hitch, a small, sharp sound of a man who had just felt the floor vanish beneath his feet. What tea?" Vincent stammered, the bravado leaking out of his voice like water from a cracked vase. "And don't play the fool, Vincent. It doesn't suit you." Henry's voice sharpened into a legal edge. "We have the blood results from Boulder. We have the forensic analysis of the toxins found in your father's system, concentrations of palliative compounds that match exactly with the supply logs Marcus Coleman recovered from the hospital pharmacy. This will is ironclad because it was born out of a desire for justice. It is legally untouchable, and your role in the accelerated decline of your father's health is now a matter of public record. You're lying." Vincent's voice climbed an octave, a shrill, desperate sound. "You can't prove anything. I'll sue you for everything you're worth. I'll tie this up in probate for a decade." "I don't think you'll have the time for a lawsuit, Vincent," Henry said softly. At that exact moment, the heavy thud of footsteps entered the audio feed. Vincent Hayes. A new voice cut in authoritative, deep, and final. It was Detective David Brooks. "I'm Detective Brooks, and you know Marcus Coleman. Don't reach for anything. Put your hands on the desk, now." "What is this?" Henry tell them. Vincent was frantic now, the sound of a struggle beginning, the scuff of expensive leather shoes on the carpet. "Said, I have Prosecutor Richard Hastings on the line for you, Vincent," Henry said. He must have put the call on speaker. Vincent Hayes. Hastings' voice came through the phone, sounding like a death knell. Based on the evidence recovered from the Boulder medical labs, the sworn testimony of Victoria Cross, and the pharmaceutical logs provided by Marcus Coleman, I have issued a warrant for your arrest. You are being taken into custody on suspicion of attempted first-degree murder conspiracy and felony end-stage endangerment. You have the right to remain silent. No. No, this is a mistake, Natalie. I need to call Natalie." Vincent's voice broke into a sob. The metallic clack-clack of handcuffs ratcheting shut echoed through the speaker. It was the most beautiful sound I had heard in years. "Natalie Richardson is currently being detained at your residence, Mr. Hayes," Detective Brooks informed him coldly. "She won't be answering your calls." Through the link, I heard Vincent sink into a chair, the sound of a man completely defeated. He wasn't shouting anymore. He was making a low, whimpering sound, the sound of a predator who had finally realized he was in a cage. The $75 million, the power, the arrogance, it had all evaporated, replaced by the cold reality of a steel bracelet and a prison cell. "It's over, Henston." Marcus Coleman's voice was the last thing I heard before the link cut out. "The CEO lived, and you're just a failed statistic." I lay back in my hospital bed and stared at the ceiling. The rage that had been burning in me for days didn't vanish, but it transformed into a quiet, cold satisfaction. My son was in handcuffs. My legacy was safe. And for the first time since I woke up in this room, I felt like the air I was breathing was actually mine. Vincent was gone. The betrayal had been met with the full force of the law. I closed my eyes, the beeping of the monitor sounding like a victory march. I had 5 days, they said, but I had used day 4 to change the world. While the metallic click of handcuffs echoed in Henry's office, a different kind of silence was being shattered across the city. Through the steady rhythmic updates from Marcus Coleman, I was able to piece together the final moments of Natalie Richardson's freedom. It was a scene of domestic normalcy violently interrupted by the arrival of the truth. Natalie was in the kitchen of the expansive estate I had helped them buy, likely preparing a meal that she assumed would be celebrated with a $75 million toast. Detective David Brooks and a team of uniformed officers didn't knock softly. They entered with the weight of a search warrant and the cold precision of a planned strike. Natalie Richardson. Detective Brooks' voice was devoid of the warmth she usually used to mask her intentions. "You are under arrest for conspiracy and the intentional administration of harmful substances with the intent to terminate the life of Charles Hayes." According to the police report Marcus later shared with me, Natalie didn't collapse. She didn't weep. She turned from the stove, a designer spatula still in her hand, and laughed a sharp, shrill sound that didn't reach her calculating eyes. "This is absurd," she shouted, her voice rising in a practiced arc of indignant outrage. "I've done nothing but care for that man. I've been a saint to him. I don't know what kind of lies Henry Morrison has fed you, but you are making a massive mistake." "We don't make mistakes based on lies, Mrs. Hayes," Brooks replied calmly. "We make arrests based on evidence." The search was systematic. While Natalie continued to protest, her voice echoing through the marble hallways of the house, the officers moved into the pantry. It didn't take long. Tucked behind a row of expensive artisanal flowers and imported oils, they found a small, unassuming wooden box. Inside were the specialized herbal tea bags, the ones with the counterfeit labels Victoria Cross had printed in the hospital pharmacy. But the most damning find wasn't the tea itself. It was a small, leather-bound journal tucked into the back of a kitchen drawer. It was a ledger of betrayal, Marcus told me later that evening. In that journal, Natalie had meticulously recorded every single dose. She had noted the dates, the times, and most chillingly, my physical reactions. Subject complained of tingling in hands today, one entry read. Increased dosage by 10%. Lethargy is becoming more pronounced. Plan remains on schedule. She hadn't just been feeding me toxins. She had been a scientist of my suffering, documenting the slow extinguishing of my life as if it were a garden project. When Brooks showed her the journal, the color finally left her face. The saintly daughter-in-law vanished, replaced by a woman who realized the paper trail she had created to ensure her own success was now the rope that would hang her in court. As the handcuffs were ratcheted onto her wrists, her protests died down into a low, venomous hiss. He was old anyway, she muttered as they led her toward the squad car. He was just taking up space. But the sweep wasn't finished. At the hospital, in the very building where I lay, fighting for breath, the law was moving through the sterile corridors of the pharmaceutical wing. Margaret Foster, the senior pharmacist who had traded her professional oath for a $10,000 bribe, was at her station. She was mid-sentence explaining a dosage requirement to a junior intern when the authorities arrived. They didn't give her the chance to hide the evidence. A quick sweep of her private locker revealed the primary smoking gun, several unlabeled vials of the high-concentration palliative compound, and a digital encrypted drive. When the tech team bypassed the security, they found a series of direct messages between Margaret and Vincent. The batch is ready. The potency is doubled as requested. Send the final payment to the usual account. One message read. The triangle was complete. The architect, the supplier, and the administrator. By sunset on day 4, the news reached my room with the finality of a closing door. Marcus Coleman walked in, looking like a man who had finally finished a very long, very dirty job. It's a clean sweep, Charles, he said, pulling up a chair. Vincent is in processing. Natalie is being booked as we speak. And Margaret Foster is currently staring at a wall in a holding cell, wondering if $10,000 was worth 20 years of her life. I lay back, the weight of the report pressing into me. 3 people I had trusted, or at least respected, had formed a circle around my life, and slowly tightened it. They had used my own house, my own money, and my own hospital to try and erase me. They found the messages, I asked. Thousands of them, Marcus confirmed. The digital trail is a mile long. They were so confident in your decline that they didn't even bother to use disappearing apps for the last month. They thought you were already a ghost, Charles. And ghosts don't testify. I looked at my hands, still thin and pale, but they weren't shaking as much anymore. The tea was gone. The poisoners were in cages. 3 arrests in one day, I whispered. The unholy trinity. Marcus agreed. Hastings is ecstatic. He has the physical evidence, the digital trail, and the eyewitness testimony of Victoria Cross. This isn't just a case anymore. It's a landslide. As Marcus left to coordinate with the prosecutor's office, the ICU room felt incredibly quiet. The machines continued their rhythmic beeping, but the sound didn't feel like a countdown anymore. It felt like a heartbeat. My heartbeat. Vincent, Natalie, and Margaret. The son who wanted my empire, the wife who wanted my lifestyle, and the pharmacist who wanted my money. They were all sitting in cold, gray rooms tonight, realizing that the man they had marked for death was the one who had ultimately signed their warrants. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in 90 days, I slept without the fear of what was in the cup. The arrest was final. The betrayal was answered. And day 4 was ending with the sound of the law finally catching up to the greed. The morning of day 5 arrived with a heavy overcast sky mirroring the grim atmosphere inside the city's central interrogation wing. I sat propped up against my pillows, the audio feed from Henry's secure connection acting as my window into the rooms where my life had been bartered for millions. Richard Hastings didn't waste time. He moved between the 3 rooms like a surgeon, cutting through the lies with the scalpel of evidence we had painstakingly gathered. The first room held Vincent. He looked smaller on the monitor, stripped of his bespoke suits and his aura of corporate inevitability. For 2 hours, he tried to maintain a wall of indignant silence. But then Hastings began laying out the physical world, the video of the new will, the encrypted messages to Margaret Foster, and the devastating tear-filled testimony of Victoria Cross. The silence in the room stretched until it snapped. "Okay, I did it." Vincent finally exploded, his voice a jagged mixture of resentment and exhaustion. He slammed his palms onto the metal table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. "My father, he's too rich, too proud. He sits on $75 million while I'm expected to wait decades for a life that should be mine now. I needed the capital to expand my own holdings. I was tired of being the son of the CEO. I wanted to be the CEO. So you decided to end his life to get it?" Hastings asked, his voice cold and clinical. Vincent let out a hollow, shivering breath. "I didn't. At first, I just wanted him to be scared. I wanted him to feel weak, to realize he needed me to run the company. But as the weeks went by and the tea kept coming, I just thought he would pass away quietly. I thought it was his time anyway. 3 months of watching him fade. I just accepted that he was going to die. I didn't think of it as murder. I thought of it as an acceleration." Hastings leaned and his eyes narrowed. "An acceleration that you meticulously engineered with a pharmacy technician and a corrupt pharmacist. That is called attempted murder in the first degree, Vincent. And with the evidence of your planning, we are adding conspiracy to commit homicide." Vincent sank back into his chair, the reality of the words finally sinking in. He wasn't a businessman anymore. He was a defendant. The second room held Natalie. She was a harder nut to crack. For 3 hours, she played the role of the terrified, misled wife. She wept, she claimed she thought the vials were actual vitamins, and she insisted she was just a messenger of love. But Hastings was prepared. He didn't argue. He simply opened a plastic evidence bag and pulled out her leather-bound journal. He began reading her own handwritten notes, aloud, the clinical observations of my failing health, the precise adjustments to the dosages, and the cold, detached way she had documented my pain. Vincent forced me." She suddenly shrieked, her composure shattering like cheap glass. "I was afraid of him. He's a monster. I only did what he told me to do. The messages on your phone tell a different story." "Natalie," Hastings countered, sliding a transcript across the table. "These aren't the words of a victim. These are the words of a partner. You were discussing the finish line and how you would spend the inheritance before the first month was even over. You weren't a passenger. You were the navigator." Natalie looked at the transcript and went completely silent. The tears stopped, replaced by a look of pure, concentrated venom. She realized the saintly mask was gone forever. Hastings recorded the charges: conspiracy and accessory to attempted murder. The third room was for Margaret Foster. The senior pharmacist looked like a ghost. She didn't fight. She didn't lie. She was a woman who had sold her soul for a relatively small price and had been living in terror ever since. "He paid me $10,000, she whispered, her head bowed. "He told me it was for a private study, a way to test the effects of concentrated palliative care on elderly patients without the red tape. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to know. I just needed the money to pay off my gambling debts. You are a licensed pharmacist, Margaret. Hastings said, his voice heavy with disappointment. You knew exactly what those concentrations would do to a human liver. You provided the weapon. Why, I know, she sobbed. I'll tell you everything. I'll give you the accounts, the logs, everything. I just didn't think it would go this far. Because of her immediate cooperation, and the fact that she was a secondary player who didn't know the full scope of the lethal intent, Hastings noted her as an accessory, with a strong possibility of a plea deal in exchange for her testimony against Vincent and Natalie. Finally, there was Victoria Cross. She sat in a separate, more secure room. She wasn't an adversary, she was the key witness. She recounted every detail, every label, and every meeting with a haunting clarity. She was the one who tied the entire unholy trinity together. I'm so sorry, Mr. Hayes, she said, looking directly into the camera, knowing I might be watching. I was a coward, but I'm finished being afraid. Because she had been the first to flip and had provided the critical evidence that saved my life, Hastings had reached a formal agreement. She would be charged as an accessory, but with a recommended sentence of only 2 years of community service and a lifetime ban from the medical field. It was a fair price for the truth. As the sun began to set on day 5, the audio feed finally went quiet. Henry sat by my bed, his face reflecting the exhaustion of the week. 4 people. Charles, Henry said quietly. 4 people are now officially processed and awaiting trial. The evidence is overwhelming. Vincent's confession alone is enough to put him away for a very long time. I lay back the words, attempted murder, and conspiracy, echoing in my mind. My son, my wife's partner, and 2 medical professionals who should have protected me. They were all bound for a courtroom now. The betrayal was complete, but so was the trap. I had 5 days, the doctors said. And as I watched the shadows lengthen across my hospital room, I realized I had made it. I had seen the truth come out. I had seen the faces of my enemies as they realized they had lost. The investigation was over. The interrogation was finished. Now only the judgment remained. July 2025. The air in the Denver High Court was thick with the scent of old wood and the heavy, invisible weight of the law. I sat in the front row, no longer a frail shadow in a hospital gown, but a man who had reclaimed his strength through sheer force of will and modern medicine. My recovery had been called a miracle by some, but I knew better it was the result of the body finally being free from the tea that had been eroding it from within. When my name was called, I walked to the witness stand with a steady pace. I sat down and looked directly at the defense table. Vincent was there. His face haggard, the arrogance that once defined him replaced by a hollow, desperate stare. Next to him sat Natalie, her eyes fixed on the floor, the mask of the loving wife long since shattered. Prosecutor Richard Hastings was a master of his craft. He didn't just tell the story. He built it brick by brick with the cold, hard materials of truth. He presented the high-definition video of my new will, where I looked into the camera and named my son as my betrayer. He displayed the Boulder medical lab results, the chemical proof of the toxins that had nearly turned my liver into stone. He played the audio logs of Victoria Cross and presented the thousands of text messages retrieved from encrypted drives. But the most haunting moment was when the plastic-sealed tea bags were held up, the mundane instruments of a domestic execution. So the evidence is not just circumstantial. Hastings told the jury, his voice echoing like a tolling bell. It is biological. It is digital. It is ocular. It is a map of a conspiracy that began with greed and ended in the ICU. The defense tried to argue coercion, tried to claim I was a paranoid old man who had hallucinated a confession. But against the mountain of science and the testimony of Victoria Cross, who spoke with the quiet conviction of a woman seeking redemption, their words were like dust in the wind. The jury was out for only 2 hours. When they returned, the The silence in the courtroom was so absolute I could hear the ticking of the clock on the far wall. Guilty on all counts, the foreperson read. The judge looked down at the defendants with a cold, unyielding gaze. Vincent Hayes for the crime of attempted first-degree murder and conspiracy. I sentence you to 25 years in state prison without the possibility of early parole. Natalie Richardson for your role in the conspiracy, and as an accessory, you are sentenced to 20 years. Margaret Foster for providing the chemical weapon, you receive 8 years with the possibility of reduction to 5 for good behavior. Finally, the judge turned to Victoria Cross. Due to your critical cooperation and for saving the life of the victim, you are found not guilty of the primary charges, but sentenced to 2 years of mandatory community service and a permanent revocation of your medical licenses. As the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs, the same metallic clack I had heard through a speaker months ago, I closed my eyes. A long, shuddering breath escaped my lungs. The weight of the last year didn't vanish, but it finally settled into the past. Justice hadn't just been served, it had been hammered into place. The following week, the final movement of my plan began. The Denver Children's Hospital Foundation received the formal notification $75 million was being transferred. It was the largest single private donation in the state's history. By August 2025, I was standing on a stage under a bright Colorado sun for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Behind me rose a magnificent 8-story structure of glass and steel, the Charles Hayes Pediatric Wing. It was a sanctuary for the innocent. It housed state-of-the-art clinics, research labs, and wards designed specifically for children fighting the hardest battles of their lives. As I stood there looking at the stone wall where my name was etched in silver letters, I didn't see a monument to my wealth. I saw a lighthouse. I watched a group of children in small wheelchairs led by doctors who finally had the tools they needed to save them. I saw a young girl no more than 6 smile as she entered the new playroom. In that moment, I realized the ultimate truth. Money, power, and the legacy I thought I wanted. None of it mattered. Survival was a gift, but the ability to do good was a privilege. Vincent had tried to bury me to take my gold. Instead, he had dug the foundation for a place that would save thousands of lives long after I was gone. I walked away from the podium, my heart feeling lighter than it had since I was a young man starting a company in a garage. I was a survivor of a dark conspiracy, but I hadn't won with violence or anger. I had won with the law, with the truth, and with a dichuch that turned a poisoner's greed into a child's hope. I lived to witness my own legacy. I lived to see the children laugh in the halls I built, and as I looked out over the Denver skyline, I knew I could finally sleep in peace. My conscience was clear, my work was done, and the story of Charles Hayes would be told not as a tragedy of betrayal, but as a victory of light over the dark. I thought I had built an empire, but I forgot to guard my own home. If you learn anything from my grandpa's story, let it be this: never ignore quiet signs of betrayal. Trust is sacred, but blind trust destroys. This is my grandpa's story, and it taught me that real family justice isn't revenge, it's truth, accountability, and where you choose to leave your legacy. In the end, God showed me clarity when I needed it most. So don't be like me, pay attention sooner. Let my grandpa's story remind you, choose wisely, protect what matters, and let family justice stand higher than blood. Because true family justice is not who inherits your wealth, but who deserves your trust. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What would you do if you were in that situation of betrayal within your own family? Share your perspective in the comments below. If this story moved, you consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. Just a quick note. While inspired by real-life themes, parts of this story have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. And if this isn't your kind of content, feel free to explore something that fits you better.